Cool.
So yes, I think we're live. Uh, is it live? I'm gonna wait for the numbers to advance a little bit here. Yes, we are live. I'm here with my new friend Daniel. Daniel, how you doing?
I'm doing really well. How you doing, Dave?
Nice to see you. Nice to meet you finally. We've
Yeah.
been having some scheduling issues, but before we get into you today and what you're up to today, I'd like you to talk us through the journey, how you came to be who you are today. Were there any religions or philosophies that you dabbled with, or how were you raised? Talk us right from the beginning, sort of the highlights, the ups and downs of your journey, and we'll take it from
Gotcha.
there.
Gotcha. No small order. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was born into a fairly religious home. My mother was religious because I was a sick kid.
Ah.
Anyway, she found her faith because of a fear that I was going to die when I was little. Uh, and that was an interesting relationship with God right off the bat. Um, it was a Christian home. And I prayed a lot, with my mother, felt God very closely as a child, often would feel God speaking through me to her in order to calm her and soothe her, um, and
Hmm.
it was a very natural place for me to feel a sense of confidence, a sense of faith, truly a sense of faith, as a young boy, and then as I entered into adulthood, I gravitated towards the rationalism of my father and my brother,
Uh,
and explored agnosticism and atheism, and started to explore more of the world's rebellion against God, and found it very compelling. It was a very compelling argument against the church mainly, and against the what the seeming idiocy of believing in such a story that includes seemingly impossible elements and was believed at a time where it was pre-science and all the traditional arguments against having any kind of connection to Christianity in particular, but in general, faith religions um, or faith-based practices. And so I became very compelled by the arguments of intelligent atheistic thinkers like Christopher Hitchens and Sam Harris, and definitely felt myself informed in a way by that experience. Um, but I also felt a deep sense of loss and hopelessness and a sense of meaninglessness that always sort of floated on top what I would say was probably just a bedrock of faith that none of those intellectual um, covers could really eradicate. There was a sense of connectedness that was beneath it all that I was just obfuscated with a life of my life experiences of pain and despair that just are the natural gravitations for a lot of people. But my particular story, I had a kid at 18. I
hmm.
moved out from Arkansas to California to go be a very small fish in an absolutely immense ocean,
Uh,
um, and felt like I had my light put under a bushel, and felt very powerless and voiceless. And I also had a personal tendency to self-abandon to extreme degrees in order to make others happy. So I was in my own personal prison. And my relationship with God through all of that was, well, how could I have been so stupid? Or how could anyone be so foolish as to believe in that story? Yet at the same time, there was a part of me that never wanted to truly say, but I was afraid to say to my mother, I'm not a Christian. I was afraid to break her heart. And ultimately, I had to go. I went and married a woman who is, self-proclaimed atheist,
mother to
um,
child or no?
mother of my child. Yeah,
Nice.
um, mother of my second child.
Oh.
So she and I had many conversations about meaning and purpose. In fact, some of the deepest and most challenging conversations on the subject. And it has been a long and slow journey of me coming back to the capacity, in many ways, the teachings of Carl Jung and Jordan Peterson had a lot to do with me take into reapproach of Christianity as a whole, recognizing from an intellectual perspective the deep value of that archetype of the story of the worst thing happening to the best possible person, of the profundity of having the Christian ethic at all, or the Christ character in the human story in and of itself was profound. But I would have to say that it was a overwhelming psychedelic trip where I completely disillusioned my ego and um, felt the beautiful powerlessness of just being, and that interrelatedness. When I came back, it couldn't be more clear that I was a soul and that I was connected to the one source of all things, and that, if anything, was worth calling God. So I reclaimed a sense of feeling confident in saying, "Of course, there's a God." I mean, I feel it is so hilariously obvious that there is a unifying force that makes all of existence occur, and all of my doubt was eradicated except for trying to make sense of it and putting it into a simple speech that others could understand. So, well, in many ways, I felt reborn through the experience and a freedom to hold in my heart that same faith that I had as a boy, and I had connected to myself in that capital S self sense, where I had not I experienced the non-dual uh, perfection, and then went right back into my everyday grind of just being miserable and focused on the negative things, and being angry about everything and always complaining about my problems. And the contrast was so brutally stark between having experienced the bliss of union to feeling just being this separate, small, miserable man that was complaining about um, all the things that I could just as easily be showering with gratitude. And so over the past 3 to 4 years, I have been subtly shifting my perspective to be in alignment with that capital S self. Um, I have devoted myself to being in devotion, so that when I'm washing the dishes, I'm actually in love. It is an offering to my family and to my God, to me, that I'm getting to experience the joys of my life as the forefront and the most important image that I hold in my mind, and m learning to recognize that I really don't know what the hell is going on. I that was probably the most wonderful thing that ever could have happened to me, is recognizing that I really have no idea how any of this works. It's way crazier than we think, man.
Mhm.
That that when you peer behind the veil and recognize that what is permeating all of this existence is just this infinite source of energy, it's madness that anything exists at all. So I just was humbled all the way down, and then revealing to myself that I am a I'm a wicked man, and I have been after my earthly pleasures, seeking comfort and sex and intoxication and all the basic stuff that are really just trying to fill a void. Coming into relationship with that in all honesty, holding that like burning fire of truth in the forefront of my mind, so that I can be truly present with my children, so that I can not be distracted, and I cannot be all up in my illusions about how great I am when I'm in the presence of others, but be genuinely in relationship with them. Um, this is my religion, is relationship, and it's deeply rooted in Christianity. It's also deeply rooted in Taoism and yoga. I study and continue to study at a place called the Circle Yoga Shala in the hills of the Ozarks in Northwest Arkansas. And so they have me, studying the Bhagavad Gita and having a deep personal relationship with that story. It's it's interesting to hold in relationship and in contrast the path of Arjuna and Krishna, as well as Christ. I read the gospel and try to understand what those words mean, and I try to take a piece of scripture each day and walk it and live it. Um, so my spirituality is very much experiential. My relationship with God is one to one. It's not up for debate with anyone, but it's something that I love to talk about. I love talking about it because it's infinitely variable and useful, and fascinating, uh, because it literally is everything. But we most people pretend that God is a bad word, that you can't even use it. So yeah, I hope that's a small enough
Yeah.
nutshell.
That's a pretty good summary. So, it's a lot of Eastern philosophy sort of weaving its way through your thoughts and experiences there. So, I like to ask people a basic couple of basic questions to figure out where they lie on that East-West, mystical, rational sort of spectrum. So, how many beings do you think there are actually? Because Eastern mysticism says there's only one. There's the one mind of God, and this is illusion. Do you fall squarely into that camp, or do you think that you and I are separate creatures created by a God who is uncreated, or uh, what do you think about the number of beings?
I would say that you and I would most certainly be having a unique experience.
I know
You
that,
have
but is it an experience of the one, or is it you are eternally separate from me?
eternally separate.
Because in my
No,
Christian worldview, you and I will enjoy heaven, hopefully, if we make it, and you will be you and I will be me. We're not going to merge with the Godhead. We are going to enter into the life of the Trinity. Yes, there is a deification that takes place, but I remain me and you remain you. It's just an ever deepening and more and more profound relationship with the life of the Godhead. So that's the Christian perspective, but it
mm,
sounds like you're heavily influenced by more Eastern, meaning Hindu and Buddhist and Taoist sort of ideas.
I would say that there's one river. I say that there's one source because I mean it's sort of like the universe means one song. There is there's one thing if you scope out far enough,
Yeah,
it's just one thing, one planet. We're all on
yeah,
that, you know,
yeah.
one
You
human.
you
But as far
understand?
as you and
Yeah,
I
go ahead.
from our personal perspective. That's interesting that you should say that. You know, I was just having a spirited conversation with my yoga teacher, who was actually pointing me back to recognizing the differences between,
Mm,
because I'm often trying to seek the
overlap.
universality, right? The similarities, but he was pointing that they lead to different afterlives.
Yeah,
You know, the Buddhists would say that they're going to go to be with emptiness, or go back to be with the one, and Christ makes a very fundamentally different claim that we will walk together again. And and he basically asked me, which afterlife would you prefer?
uh, uh,
You know,
uh,
which one of those really sounds like the one? And he said, I would want to walk with my Lord. And I have to say it's perhaps um, the most compelling desire is to be uh, side by side, not one with, although I have experienced the bliss of oneness. And to be honest with you, there's a part of me that goes, yeah, I'd rather walk with my Lord. And then there's another part of me that says, it doesn't matter.
yeah. Well, we get both, right? In Christianity, we get both. We get the oneness because it's a mystical union. It's a romantic sort of almost like the marriage act. It's like, there's an intimacy that is so profound that there is a oneness, but at the same time, there's also the separateness. So you have both, in Christianity. The thing with Buddhism is, as far as I've understood, is there's no loser. There's there's no hell. I have heard that some schools of Buddhism allow for some sort of prolonged purgatory or something resembling hell, but that ultimately, it's just God. That's all there is. So you understand the difference between monotheism and monism. Monism is, I think monism ultimately is true, but it's in the context here below of monotheism. So I'm going to have my cake and eat it too, because I relate very strongly to the religions and philosophies of the East, and I'm very sympathetic, and it is attractive to me. It's very mystical, but I also have that rational intellectual side that drew me to Christianity, not to Hinduism. It's interesting to think about the conversion of C.S. Lewis. He hesitated when he found God. He hesitated between Christianity and Hinduism. That was his dilemma. I don't know if you're aware of that, but it's a fascinating thing to think about. You know, they seem like chalk and cheese, but I have personal existential experience that shows how they are, sort of different stories about ultimate reality that are very, very compatible. Like at heart, I am a monist, and I was an existential. I went through a sort of crisis at age 39, where I became a hard solipsist. I believed I was the one mind, the disembodied mind of God. So luckily, I came out of that into Christianity. But all of this to say that I'm very sympathetic, and I'm not judging the East. I want what the East has to offer, but packaged in the context here below, while we're here, in the context of monotheism. So I'm just telling you this so that you can relate to me, and we can compare and contrast.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I appreciate the value of contrast, of polarity, of having an opposite. And I think that it's if all of this was called into being, it might as well be for something. And that something of the contrast between the light and the dark, of the up and the down, of the pleasure and suffering. There is an extraordinary amount of information, of learning, of experience, of transformation, and if God is experiencing all of this from beginning, middle to end as one, and we are the limited versions of God. We're the limited form of God that gets to experience the story linearly. The only thing that God can't experience is limitless, is being limited. If God is unlimited, so there's a value to our limited nature in order to be the story, to have the unfolding experience, the transformation, so that anything it happens, so that anything can be experienced at all.
Yeah, well, it's interesting you bring up the finiteness of our experience, and then the infinite, unbounded experience of God. But in Christianity, we have the Trinity, and the second person took on flesh and took on our finite human nature. He remained God. He was fully God, and he was also fully man. So, I disagree. I do disagree respectfully that God doesn't understand the finite perspective. He understands it better than we do, and he's lived your life, my life, and everyone else's life. God does live that more fully, more completely. That's the Christian
But
teaching.
wouldn't he live that through us?
Yeah, yeah, he lives it through us. Yeah, yeah,
That's
he
my
does. Yeah, he does.
that's my claim, is that it's through us that God gets to experience the limited
Excuse me. But
experience.
the funny thing about Christianity, excuse me for coughing and for interrupting. But the funny thing about our creation, and you and I as creatures, human creatures, the funny thing about that is that it's not like we had our world and then God popped into it. God, Jesus Christ is the first man. He in terms of the in the mind of God, it was Christ first and then everybody else. So it wasn't just like he, as an afterthought, popped into history. This is the mystical Christian understanding of the incarnation. And there are two schools about it, which differ slightly. The there's a Thomistic school, and then the sort of more Platonic school. I forget what they call that school. The Franciscan school. The Franciscan school says that Christ would have incarnated even without the fall. The original sin. And that's the school that I adhere to. I just think it's a more beautiful story. and we're allowed to choose, pick and choose. It's not defined by the church. So yeah, Christ is the ultimate, and he's the absolute, and he has primacy, absolute primacy. And so you and I are made in the image of God, and God in his mind had Christ first, and then he chose when and where to incarnate, you know. So I think it's just important to point that out, and you can do with that what you will. You know? Because the humanity, you know, the humanity is central to God's plan for all of creation, because God took on humanity. So it's not like the atheistic Darwinian story where there was all this life and then, you know, it eventually evolved into humans and stopped evolving, or whatever they say. But you know, far from it. It's like humanity is at the center of God's plan from the beginning. So when you say that God experiences life through us, we are secondary and Christ is primary. Like Christ is human, fully human, and we are secondary humans, and he is the primary human. I just wanted to make that clear, and it might be interesting for you to chew on that idea, or maybe you've already encountered this idea and integrated it into your worldview.
Mm. Christ is primary. I think Christ's primacy is in that he had perfect faith.
Okay.
He recognized himself in the hierarchy with no resistance, no doubt. He received fully God's love, God's influence.
Well, he did resist in his human nature. He did resist. He said, "If it's possible, God, take this cup from me." Like that's resistance, you know. It's like I'm not happy about this suffering that I, you know.
And also, God, why have you forsaken me?
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
So there is resistance. There is resistance in the human nature. But yeah, he conformed himself. I do agree with you. He did conform his will, his human will, to his own divine will. So there was, you know, resistance, but only because the human nature is weak. But
What
his
else could
his
we I wouldn't say that it's weak, I'd say that it is what it is.
yeah,
The animal needs to eat, it needs to sleep,
doesn't
it
like
needs to
pain.
have it makes absolute sense for the animal to run away from
Yeah,
fire.
yeah,
I mean, for
yeah.
the animal to submit to something that is telling it that its own demise is what's best for it is a remarkable thing that the body is capable of, that it can be a humble servant. And that's a remarkable aspect of the example of Christ, is that he wasn't beyond suffering. He embodied suffering more wholly and completely than any other character.
Oh yeah.
To be crucified in public, slowly dying for days in front of your mother is 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 perhaps enough to maybe wake us out of our sleep and pay attention that there's something up there that is there's also something down there in suffering that is
Mm.
transcendent too.
Yeah.
And I
He
find
went
that
to hell. He descended into Hades. He descended into Hades. So
well, he also, I mean, I'd say he descended into Hades up there on the cross. You know, we want to talk about
yeah.
the things that we don't see, but if we see him up on the cross, we see, why do we need a more brutal hell than what we have right here on earth in order to be woken up to the recognition that there is such thing as a malevolence, there is such thing as evil, and we manifest that. And I actually believe that we manifest it by not loving ourselves. I say that Christ allowed God's love into his being and was able to do all of the things that we thought were amazing because he felt the full power of God's love inside of him. And he was capable of saying, I am willing to endure the most brutal suffering imaginable because I have faith that there is something beyond suffering, that God's love and God's will for me is more important than me running away from my animal's fear of the moment.
Uh, yeah. I just want to emphasize the Christian teaching that the suffering of Christ, the sufferings plural of Christ, encompass every evil. It encompasses all the disease, all the war, all the divorce, all the, you know, all the horrors of pornography, all the horrors of child abuse, whatever you can imagine that's painful, all the misunderstanding, all the confusion, the feeling alone, feeling isolation, feeling abandoned, everything that humans have experienced. That's why I said God has lived your life and my life and every life that's human, and probably the animal lives too. Although it has a very different meaning. Um, but it's the emotional pain that is the true suffering of Christ. The physical pain is real and it's devastating, but it's nothing compared to the emotional pain, the spiritual pain of having given yourself and yet being told, no, I don't want your grace. I don't want what you have to offer me. I don't want your love. That's what he went through, during his trial and his suffering and his death was
And he also
that
experiences
rejection.
that he also experiences that in every single one of us.
Exactly. Well, yeah, that's what it was. There are no bounds for God. He's not bound by space or by time. So he was experiencing all the rejection, all the corruption, all the pain and disease and everything else in that time on the cross, and maybe even in the garden when he was praying that the cup, if it was possible to pass from him. I don't know exactly the duration of the sort of the mystical hellish nightmare that he had to go through. But I'm sure it seemed like an eternity. And I've read stories from Christian mystics who have voluntarily gone to hell as a sort of a reparation for their loved ones. And according to our time, they were barely gone 5 minutes, but from their perspective, it was an eternity. It was an eternity in hell. So I think that's a little tiny taste of what Christ went through when he suffered and died for us. But I just wanted to emphasize that the physical suffering is real and it was horrible, but it was nothing compared to that feeling like I've given you everything and you still say no. That rejection, it's astonishing, it's horrifying, and it hurts. It hurts Christ.
And that's very valuable to point out in that if that's happening at the level of us, say if I am saying I am unworthy or I'm such an asshole or I'm so useless and I go deeper into that psycho-spiritual physical stance of holding myself as unworthy or unaccepting of God's grace. I literally close off and don't allow it in. That is, excruciating for the God that has to experience it through me, excruciating for me as the animal, excruciating for the soul to be bound by a mind and an ideology that does not serve self, soul, or the world, and which is why fundamentally the message of you should love yourself, that you are a child of God, is revolutionary at a scale that I don't think anyone actually recognizes how profound that simple truth is. Because it's, from the archetypal sense, God creates the sun receives the light. God, if the deviation of not loving oneself, um, actually creates all pain and suffering, creates all fear. It's not loving yourself that creates the devil. It's not loving yourself that creates hell. It's saying I am unworthy or I am not going to receive this. I'm not going to simply allow myself to be present with the base nature of what I am. Instead, I'm going to be fixated on my fear, my sin. There's a capacity to be with one's own limitations. It's a capacity within myself to hold how ashamed I've felt about the how terrible a father I was, how awful a husband I was, and how unreal and insubstantial a friend I was. I can hold that without further abuse. I can hold that by recognizing that I can be with Christ. I can allow Christ into my life. I can allow love to be around that shame. And that is it burns. It burns to hold that shame. That's why there's the fiery heart of Christ. But it's truly transformative And it's sort of like saying you can love the worst of yourself. You really can. You can hold and drag up all the things that you think are just totally unlovable, and you can put that on the table for Christ. None of it's beyond it. None of it is beyond Christ's love.
Yeah, well, we're commanded to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. That implies we have to love ourselves. And it also implies that we naturally have an inclination to love ourselves. Like you talked about the appetites, the lower appetites, I want sex and food and whatever. Those are good in their proper place and when it's appropriate. The abuses come in when it's not well ordered. But the self-love is still commanded. We are still commanded to love ourselves. Saint Augustine said that intelligent self-love is to will for the other what you will for yourself. And so you commend the other to God because that's what you want for yourself. You want to go to God. You want to be selfless and virtuous and live unto God, because the first commandment is to love God, and the second commandment is to love neighbor. And of course, we love neighbor as we love ourselves. So really, the second commandment is to love neighbor and self, and we're supposed to love our neighbor as ourself. So it's sort of like it is inescapably sort of self-centered. We don't really have a choice in that. But the point of religion is to escape your self-centeredness by realizing that what is good for you, what is wholesome and good for you authentically, is what we should wish for our neighbor. And that's how we escape the self-centeredness, ironically, is by acknowledging that what's good for me is good for my neighbor, and I shouldn't take a bigger piece of the pie at his expense. Be generous, be sharing. And I'm using a very trite and banal example, but when we
Yes,
think
but
about
you
what's
you
happening in
should
the
also make sure you have some pie because pie is delicious.
excuse me.
Yeah.
Excuse me. So, yeah, I was laughing because we just had pie tonight, lemon meringue pie. I shouldn't be eating it when I'm sick, but I thought, oh, I'm feeling better. I'm gonna have some pie.
Hey, have some pie.
But yeah, we have to love ourselves, and usually
You know,
that's not a
it's
problem. But
it's funny, I mean, you put it well, it's self-centered, and that's a thing that we fight, especially those of us that are conscious of the idea of the ego. We've gotta battle with the ego and fight with it, but ultimately, there is something that predates the ego. The self-awareness is something that is the development of growing and maturing, but the baby, the child, um, is just a more pure manifestation of that love that is unencumbered, but until it is imposed upon either by their own basic will, desires, or the projections of our limitedness that we put and place upon them, and as if just as Christ teaches, you must become like the child if you
yeah,
want to enter into the kingdom of heaven.
yeah,
It's that my son, when I pick him up and he receives my love, I can feel him genuinely receiving my love into his body. I can feel him melt into my hug, his heart to my heart. I can feel him receiving it. There was one time I was hugging him, and my wife was talking to my son. It's like, "You gonna come?" He's like, "Yeah, I'm just gonna let Dad finish hugging me." I'm gonna let this run its course, um, and to be able to receive love is a profound gift, and most of us are. I see it as a wounded world, and I think that this is why religions exist. This is why Christ came into it. Is that we're all stricken with this inability to love ourselves, and it creates all of the trauma. It creates all of the seeking of external sources of pleasure and fulfillment, and trying to find God out there when it's actually just trying to come into you as subtle. I have this image of God. There's a description of God. God is the presence that protects you from nothing but sustains you through everything. That is a very valuable way of reframing for those that like to argue with, well, why does God allow for tsunamis or for cancer or
Mm.
for disease or all those things? It's like, no, 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 no. God is like the sunshine constantly pouring into this world the opportunity for life. It's it's flowing into your being right now, giving you the opportunity to be in love with existence. And it's not going to protect you from getting ill and dying. It's not gonna protect you from the storm. It does not do any of those things, but you have the opportunity to be in love with all of this. And so we have like a bitter shaking of our fist that a more ideal reality could exist if there was no suffering whatsoever. But if there was no suffering, there would be no contrast. There'd be no polarity. There could be no up and down. There could be no hot and cold. And then there would be nothing. And then it would just be like that unified state that, God must have wanted us to exist in order for this contrast, this experience to be here. Only thing that I can be dead certain of, Sam Harris says, the atheistic thinker, the only thing that you can be certain of is that it's like something to be you. You're experiencing something, whether you don't know if this is a simulation from some AI, that we're living in some post-apocalyptic scenario where we're actually plugged into a machine. You can't be sure that they haven't tricked you and perfected the matrix. You can't be sure of anything except for the fact that it's like something to be you. For some reason, you're here right now. You see, you hear, you feel, whatever it is that's receiving is there. And to me, that's sort of just like, well, that's soul. That's consciousness, that's awareness, that's God experiencing through this. And fundamentally, my inner child reminds me that I don't need to know the answers. I just need to be here with what it is. And genuinely, the happier and more loving I am, the more happy and loving my family are, and the more copacetic and joyful. And you can feel the contrast. There's hell. I've been there in my own layer of hell. I know there are deeper layers of hell. I have seen them, and thank God I have not had to personally experience them in this incarnation. But I have experienced enough to say that love is better than fear and hate. Love is better. And so I lean towards that. I lean towards the love of my music, the love of my wife, the love of creation. And that to me is loving myself, is just being genuinely in love with life. And if I'm not loving what I'm doing, I should stop. Or I should find out how I can love the essential suffering, because sometimes I can't stop the fact that my neck hurts. I just kind of like, okay, what is my body telling me I need right now?
Yeah, yeah. So I always ask my atheist guests this, but I'll ask you the same question. And I've asked Buddhists and Hindus too the same question. Uh, is there any difference between the best case scenario and the worst case scenario for any given human? So if you're Buddhist, you'll say no, there's no difference. There's just the one outcome. It's just the one ultimate reality. It's like if you're a monist, that's what you have to answer. But if you're a Christian, you'll say heaven is the best outcome, hell is the worst outcome, and once you're in, you're in. You can't get out. There's a chasm that separates the two, and they're different worldviews with different perspectives. What do you say? Is there any difference at all between the best case scenario and the worst case scenario?
Of course there is.
Okay.
The problem that I have with a lot of transcendental view is that it's trying to transcend the body as if it's irrelevant, and it's not. Why have it at all if it's irrelevant? I would say that integration is a more interesting scenario because that's a divine union. That's a marriage between soul and flesh. And I think that that's what Christ was trying to tell us: is this is my body, this is my blood. You're eating this. It is becoming part of you. And to be in relationship with the divine, and to recognize almost like a tantric loving relationship of the sensorial nature of being, but also in relationship with the spirit and the divine beyond. If I'm to say that it's not any difference to be kissing and loving on my family versus having my hand in the fire of the stove, I'm a madman, and you should not listen to what I say, because I'm not going to be a good guide for anybody to do anything that has any kind of relationship with physical reality. I'm trying to transcend reality. And to me, that's just fundamentally ungrateful. The idea of trying to get off the wheel never really landed for me because it was just ungrateful. We have this wheel. What can I do with it? Like, truly, if life gives you lemons, make lemonade. If life gave me this form, and I know I can walk, I can see, I'm not suffering from some extraordinary disease. I recognize that I live in a life of comfort. I have privileges and access and strengths, and still, I was capable of being a miserable man. I was capable of making my life worse with every utterance of my breath. So there, I still can point in two different directions and recognize that one is better because one produces stress in my body, disease, pain, suffering reflecting in my relationships, and the other produces a sense of peace, and it produces a sense of magnetism to the people around me. They actually want to be around me when I'm centered in love of myself. When I'm loving myself most, I'm like surrounded by people. There's good food. I'm probably playing music or having a good conversation. There's this feeling emanating from the earth that everything is all right and that all of the suffering of life is somehow worth it. And everybody is having a good time smiling. To say that that's not better than me being alone and crying on the front porch,
Mhm.
thinking that my wife absolutely hates me and that I might as well just die, like I really just want to die. To think that one of those things isn't better than the other, I just don't see the point. And just, yeah, I just got to smile and nod, you know?
Right, but the what the Hindus and the Buddhists say is, well, this is just illusion, and ultimately we're going to find out that we are just, we are God, we are God, and that it's just heaven. That's the Eastern mystical monism, right? It's called monism because there's only God. It's not Satan. It's not suffering. It's God in bliss,
Now, I
right?
will say that there's a value in being able to recognize the beauty and bliss of being in any scenario, even the ones that are very hard, because I can look back at being sad at, and wanting to die and being alone in the dark on the front porch crying and writing my songs about how I didn't want to be here
Good
anymore.
songs though.
Well, yeah, I look back on that and I recognize that as the dark night of the soul that afforded me the opportunity to recognize the beauty of my own suffering. I transmuted that into song. I also recognized that I had a wound and that it wasn't that I was in the worst place ever. I was just coming into relationship with my wounded child that was also there for my father, that was there for my grandfather and for my grandfather's father. And that I was actually doing the work of multiple generations worth of healing within my own body so that I could take a step closer to that for my son. And so that there's extraordinary beauty there, and there is God there too, and there is heaven there too, even though it was brutal. You talk that about emotional suffering. That was me experiencing the emotional suffering that from generations the men in my family had repressed because it was so excruciating. I'm not even going to feel anything. I'd rather be numb. I'd rather be a zombie than to feel any of that. And I'd say, if I can truly embrace hell, if I can embrace the suffering like Christ did, I can survive it. Or and a part of me survives it that is greater than anything that I'm holding on to. And so I think in a way the Buddhists are right. But it's not to say that one isn't better than the other. It's not to say that I'm not going to strive towards heaven. I would say that perhaps they're saying that a state of surrender is really the ultimate stance.
Yeah. I got a couple of questions from the live chat here. I want to give a shout out to my friend Chris. I haven't seen him in a while. And Daniel and Christopher and Nicola. There are a couple of questions for you. Uh, he asks, what does he mean by a person being creative? What does it mean for a human to be creative? And it's a very broad question and it's a difficult question, but what would you
Well,
say?
it's interesting. It's sort of like a prism, isn't it? Because if the analogy of the sun stands, the light of the sun comes to warm the earth. It makes all of life possible. So in many ways, you could look and understand why at one time they worshipped the sun, because that without the sun, we wouldn't have any light. There wouldn't be any light or dark. It would just be darkness. Nothing of it would exist at all. So we have some energy that's given to us. And as a human being, we have that limited perspective. And as an artist, as a songwriter, I've come into greater and greater relationship to that limitedness. I used to write with this idea of trying to write in a universal song that was for
Uh,
everybody. But as it turned out, it was the closer and closer I got to my particular story, the richer and more genuine the song became, and thus more universal. So by coming more and more honed into the niche of just who am I and what am I doing? Like what is What do I have from point A to point B in this story of being Daniel? And to work with that and to allow the creative force. I mean, having children is a creative act. And I know that it happens at the level of the animal in a very simple and basic way. Yet human beings, for some reason, bring into this world a particularity, a personality that is unique and interesting and prismatic and colorful. And that's why it's like anything at all to have a conversation with you, man. You have a perspective of, for some reason, you're interested in the particular books that you've read to come at me with the angles you're coming at me with. And I have my stories and my songs and my experiences. And this conversation is a creative act that they're witnessing and now are curious about, which will thus create more interest in the world. And so we all are creative beings. Like if Rick Rubin, the music producer, wrote a book called The Creative Act, and he just makes the claim that we are all creators. We all have a creative impulse in us. Some of us are more asleep than others and are not really participating in the creative act as much. But the more and more interested you become in the world, the more you find that that interest is like a beacon that's pointing towards what your soul's purpose is. I'm really interested in talking to people about God and faith and religion, and I'm just gonna fucking go and do that all day, every day, because that's what just lights up my spirit up. For me, it's songwriting and conversation and just a depth of experience. So there's creativity to be had in every breath.
So, if I'm to sort of summarize that, creativity is nothing but authenticity for you. It's authenticity. It's just being in the moment, reacting, responding, following your lights. Is that a fair assessment of creativity?
I would say that's the tip of the spear, what
Okay.
most genuinely interests you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The next question is, who are your favorite Catholic writers? Have you read any Catholic writers, mystics,
Does
or?
does Richard Rohr count?
Well, I mean, he's ostensibly Catholic. I think he's been condemned. Certain of his writings have been condemned. I'm not exactly sure of his status, but sure, yeah, okay. What does he say that you like?
He talks about the universal nature of Christ as
Rohr, right?
yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna look up the Cole's notes on him now. I do have a couple of his books, but I don't think I finished them. So the
He
universal nature of Christ, okay.
He also has a book called Adam's Return, which is extraordinarily rich if you're into the dialogue around men's work and men's initiation rites. Those are
Okay.
of significance to me, um, as I've been trying to understand my relationship with masculinity at large.
Okay.
Uh, and so his examples of Christ as the lover, warrior, prophet, and king, the way that Christ embodies those for us, it's really potent, very very potent. Especially as you're trying to understand how to be a good man in this world, it's not so easy. It's not so obvious, especially with the critique that is constantly being waged against men, the patriarchy, and anything masculine. So having an example of a healthy, positive masculine is one of the most important things for a man to have a grasp on. And Christ is perhaps the best example, if, as you say, prime example.
So, thank you for that. Yeah, I'm gonna have to read up more on Richard Rohr. Sounds like he's very controversial, for many different reasons that have to do with, the dogmas of the Catholic Church, but probably not so controversial for you because you're not bound to the dogmas, in your conscience because you don't think that the Catholic Church is true. There's another question here about,
Hmm.
hold on, where's the question here? Have I forgotten the question? In the meantime, while I'm looking through the comments here, can you pick up your guitar and play us one of your songs that you've written? Are you comfortable doing that?
Sure.
Something that has a spiritual twist to it or a religious content, because that's what I'm into here. And I'm sure
Okay.
it's yeah, I'm sure it will be anyway.
Yeah, sure. Can you hear that all right?
Perfect.
Well, I could sit here crying about the world that's round me, dying about the bees in the trees like long lost lovers. 'Cause Lord knows I had to go. I'm making my life miserable and giving up on everything that matters. Singing, where's the love? Where's the love? God told me I could have forever. Where's the time, the everlasting kind, that'll hold my soul and I can grow no older? Trying to be softer while making my back stronger. Just living like I ain't got tomorrow. The things I done are under the sun, and Lord, I hope I had some fun, at least enough to balance out the sorrow. Singing, where's the love? Where's the love? God told me I could have forever. Where's the time, the everlasting kind, that'll hold my soul when I can grow no older? That'll hold my soul. Whoa. Well, some days life comes easy, then others it defeats me. I'm learning that the story gives me power, but everyone's so busy just building up their cities and giving away their lifetime hour by hour. Singing, where's the love? Where's the love? God told me I could have forever. Where's the time, the everlasting kind, that'll hold my soul when I can grow no older? That'll hold my soul. That'll hold my soul. Yeah.
Bravo. Very
Thank
good. That was jaunty. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mm-hmm.
uplifting and good energy. Yeah, good vibes. Very. I should have only musicians on my podcast from now on, and they can play me a tune.
There you go.
It's a beautiful thing. You know, I think that music is divine, to
Mm.
the extent that it's music. Okay, if you hear crappy music, it's falling short of the standard. You know, it's falling short of the definition of music.
Yeah.
And you know, to the extent that music is music, it's divine.
Agreed.
It's magical, it's mystical, and I mean, I can hear a melody that brings me to tears. I don't know why. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know why.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
It's very special.
I just heard a flautist play with Bela Fleck and Zakir Hussein. A flautist was playing a note, and it brought tears to my eyes. And I looked at the person left of me. I said, "That made me tear up." And they said, "Me too."
Wow. It was a sustained note, or it was repeated
It
note,
was
or
it was there was a lot of space around it, and it was melodic, and it just rose in this particular way
uh,
that seemed to just call upon an image of a field, of like
uh-huh.
a grassy, beautiful golden place.
Uh-huh.
And it spoke to my heart in such a way as to bring me there, as if to say, "You are in heaven, you know? You're
Wow.
with God. You can let go." Yeah,
It's amazing. It's amazing the power of music.
yeah.
So yeah, I'm jealous, you know, that you're a musician. I dabble with you know, crappy composition just on the computer, make some experimental music and whatever. It's just really crappy, but you know, it's something that we have access to as consumers, if not as we can't all be Beethoven or Bach or
It's
Mozart or
true, but we can
whatever.
all create. That's
Yeah,
what I
yeah,
teach. I
yeah.
teach a lot of times I teach dads to write songs for the kids,
Nice.
uh, just because it's your kids don't care. They do not care. You get together with 3 chords. Me and my son just get C, G, and D, and then we make up a song about dragons or, you know, whatever's on our mind. Volcanoes. We just go deep into he'll give me some words and some lyrics, and I'll give him some words and some lyrics, and then we just jam out to that for 3 to 7 minutes, and then it was like, "Okay, you wanna do another one?"
Nice. Beautiful. Yeah, it's beautiful. My big thing is 70s prog,
Mhm.
progressive rock, and the reason that I'm drawn to that, even though a lot of it's crap, the reason I'm drawn to it is because there was a certain at the time it wasn't called prog, it was called underground.
Mm,
Okay. And the ethos of that time, they're just coming out of the late 60s, which was all about drugs and psychedelia and that sort of stuff, which I also like. Not the drugs, but the music. But they came out of that and they started expanding and saying, let's bust through all the things and break down the walls between the genres of music and bring in this and play with that and experiment. And that's what gets me excited. That's what
mhm.
gets me excited. And the same thing's happening today. There's new stuff happening, and it's discovery. You know, that's what excites me. Discovery.
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
like I like the danger, I like the risk of exploration because, like I said, a lot of the music that I like, it's not necessarily the best music, but it's a voyage and it's interesting
yeah,
and there are ugly parts to it. Like, I mean, I embrace that also. I embrace
yeah,
the ugly, and there's there's a tension in the discord and the chaos that gets
mm,
resolved, and that is a beautiful thing. The
yeah,
resolution.
contrast,
Yeah.
yeah,
It's amazing. So I was thinking about what you were saying earlier, and I wanted to just present you with Saint Faustina. She was a Polish nun. She had a vision of Christ. She had a relationship with Christ where he would communicate with her, allegedly. And I believe that it's true. But we're not obliged to believe that it's true, but I believe it. It's pious to believe it because the church approved of the apparitions. But her thing's all about divine mercy. There's this idea that, Christ actually said to her that what wounds me is not the sin of the sinner. What wounds me is the lack of faith in my mercy, the lack of faith that I will forgive. It's not the sin, it's the hardness of heart, you know,
mhm.
because
It's
the
it's
sin is what
interesting
it
you just
is.
say that, the hardness of heart. I was having a really meaningful and wonderful conversation with a friend of mine who's going through a really hard time in his marriage, and he's just the 2 of us were connecting and we were, like, out in the sunshine and took off our shirts and started, like, doing some push-ups on the ground, just, like, feeling our bodies and feeling like just this sense of like freedom and play to like go climb a tree. But the conversation was out throughout all of it. It's just like he recognized that he had just kind of completely abandoned his inner child and his sense of self, and this was making him very hard hearted. And we had this really really significant clarity that most men today are soft on the outside, hard on the inside, but we should actually be hard on the outside and soft on the inside. When I said that to my wife, she said, There's something that spoke to the feminine in that, is that making my body hard and strong on the outside while learning to be soft inside our hearts. There's a goldenness to that, and I think that that's a proper example of healthy masculine, is to create the structure and the form that holds space for things, but to be open so that the feminine, and I know these are trite and charged terms, the masculine and the feminine, but to just be upright enough that you can actually hold yourself open. This is a state of being that I think is actually in relationship. It's a posture. The Zen teacher, Shinru Suzuki, said the posture is the right state of mind. It's by holding yourself in proper relationship that you actually hold the right state of mind in order to allow higher consciousness to come into you. So I've recognized this as actually like it was a recent re-epiphany that my neck pain is an example of me abandoning myself to go a little too deep into the conversation. You know, I need to stay with myself,
Mm,
and posture is a form of self-love that's going to help me not be in pain. My body
mm, mm.
needs that love of my attention.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's funny because today I had a little thought that was inverted, and it's relevant now because I was thinking about the well, you'll know what I was thinking when I inverted. The inversion was the velvet fist in the iron glove. I meant to say the iron fist in the velvet glove, but I was thinking about that. It's an interesting idea, like a velvet fist, a soft fist inside of a an iron glove. That's an interesting idea. And then you come out and say this thing about the soft on the inside, hard on the outside. It's
Yeah,
coincidence.
yeah, synchronistic. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I think I love the synchronistics. I love usually the path that I'm on is often littered with synchronicities left and right. Um, but that piece right there, that what's interesting about that is actually that's a line in the song that I just sang. I'm making my back stronger while I'm trying to be softer while making my back stronger. It's
Yeah, I
literally
heard that. I heard that. Yeah.
yeah, it's literally it's in there. It's just waiting for me to discover it and to remember it each day.
My friend is asking, he must have joined late because he's asking what you think about psychedelics, and those of us who caught the first part of the interview know what you think of psychedelics. It's
Yeah.
pivotal in your story. But I took mushrooms. I've never taken acid, but I had a really good mushroom trip, and I just had that perspective, like how small we are as humans, and how big trees are, and
Mhm.
how big the universe is, and I certainly like psychedelic music and read Carlos Castaneda and different things like that. And I'm hardly a psychonaut, but I one good trip on mushrooms and one sort of flat trip on mushrooms. But the best part of my mushroom trip was coming down from it, because I had all sorts of weird stuff happen while I was on the mushrooms. But the best part of it for me afterwards was just the peace and the calm of. I don't know if you've tried magic mushrooms or not.
Psilocybin mushrooms is the only psychedelic that I've done. I've done it
Oh,
a number of times, and not enough to consider myself a psychonaut, but enough to have a relationship with it of deep love and deep respect.
is that what triggered your epiphany that in your
Yeah,
story?
it was 4.4 grams of psilocybin, and that that was enough for me to have a total dissolving of ego, where I at first was confronted with a tremendous amount of fear as time became expanded, and I felt very tired and like I was going to be trapped inside of it forever. And I had this distinct feeling of I came before God without having my question ready. Just a humbling, fearful experience. And then my wife's voice in my head told me to go take care of my body. You dumb idiot. And I went and got comfortable, stripped down, and went into a cozy bed, and allowed myself to dissolve. And that surrender was what saved me. And it was the most beautiful release of energy, or the feeling of the total flow of spiritual energy, like just a constant river that's always there. And I remember coming back into form and just being so utterly grateful that there was form, that the walls were there, that my body was here, that it wasn't just infinite. Because yeah, it's wonderful. It's wonderful to experience the infinite expanse of everything in chaos, but it's also really quite wonderful to be in form and to have simplicity and stillness and quiet. um, I deeply admire the power of psychedelics. I think they are to be respected, and I think that they're often not, just as everything else is, but I think that they're pretty much a portal. As Michael Pollan talked about it in How to Change Your Mind. He talks about how they disable the default mode network, which is essentially the locus of self in the mind. So the ego is basically just sort of switched off, or lessened in its grasp over our reality. So then we're basically opened up to the possibility of seeing more of what's there, more of the colors that are there, more of the information that is there than what we see when we're limited, because the mind is essentially a limiter. Its primary function is to reduce the information, not to produce the information. The mind reduces, the eye reduces, the ear reduces, and that's so that we don't have to take on the infinites of information that's around us. And so when the dissolving of the default mode network opens everything up, it's really humbling. It's like, yeah, I'm really small. Like everything is infinite and massive and overwhelming, and that's an appropriate relationship to have with God. It's like being caught in a rainstorm up in a tree, as Paul Stamets, I think, the big mushroom guy, who like has written books about it, and he also has like a whole fungi medicinal line and magazine and like offering.
He
But
sounds
he
like a fun guy.
Fun guy, yeah, there you go.
Sorry about
He
that.
he had his experience with crazy amount of mushrooms up in a tree in the middle of a thunderstorm.
Ooh.
And I mean, you don't need to be on mushrooms in order to be totally in awe of nature, to be stuck up in a tree in a thunderstorm. But it is that level of awe that puts you in right relationship. I think that is more along the lines of my relationship with the idea of having a fear of God. It's like I know that I'm gonna die. I know that all of this is then I like I've had close brushes with death in car accidents. It's enough to make me recognize any of this could be over in an instant. Whether it's a car accident, an aneurysm, whether it's a slow, long process, one way or another, I'm not in control of any of this. And that, as the Stoics would have you believe,
Mhm.
with a daily death practice, a memento mori, they would have you face your death every day, and it gives you a right relationship. And this is really how I stay in relationship with my children properly, is by recognizing that they're going to grow up,
Mhm.
that their hands are not always going to be so small,
Mhm.
and that makes them precious to me right now, which is all there is.
Yeah, I got another question for you from the live stream. I want to give a shout out, first of all, to my friend Haley, who's in the live chat here. Nice to see a female in the live chat.
Hi,
Um,
Haley.
the question from Risto is there justice in the universe? I say that there's absolute justice ultimately, because there will be a reckoning of accounts, but uh, injustice seems to reign here. But it's just an apparent injustice, and we just need to bide our time because vengeance is mine, says the Lord. So that's my Christian answer. What's your answer, Daniel?
Is
Justice
there
in the universe. Is there
justice in
justice?
the universe? Yeah.
It's a great question.
Yeah, Batman believed it enough to fight for it.
Ha ha ha.
But I'm for a moment, I'm wanting to just understand the definition of justice, because obviously this is a human word, and this is and it's trying to I'm trying to understand it with a human mind,
Yeah.
uh, and I have that limited human relationship with it, where I think that if you take something of mine, I need to take something from you, or something needs to be taken from you, or something needs to be returned to me. Those kinds of like really small relative human examples of justice. Now, I would say that I think of justice more along the lines of a karmic web, and that, like the ocean, there's a great wave and there's a little wave, but ultimately it's one ocean. Ultimately, the big wave goes down and another wave comes up. It's all sort of balancing out in some way, and that there's going to be some. I would say that the God's version of justice is probably on such a larger scale than we could ever understand, that we may only think of God as unjust. How could God allow something to be taken from me, for my house to burn down? Well, if you look across the timeline, perhaps the house burning down opened up another opportunity, like the example of Job. Staying ever open to the opportunity for goodness to happen again is a better stance, because you have another chance. And so having a sense that there is justice in the grand scheme of things, but justice again is not really the word that encapsulates it for me. It's more just a sense of faith that And I know I'm sort of exploding the term by abandoning it that way, but in relationship with the karmic idea, I need not worry about the guy that cuts me off in traffic. His misery is his own. His suffering is his cross to bear. And my best relationship with that dynamic is to just let go and let God. So if somebody steals from me, I should, as I think as Christ would teach, is to, they take your shirt, give them your jacket too. They hit you in the cheek, you give them turn the other cheek. Um, that's Christ's example, because I would say that that's a over obsession with worldly things and with particular outcomes. Maybe I needed to learn from that divorce. Maybe I needed to learn from that loss. Maybe there was some value in it. And if I look at it from that perspective, that to me is an example of faith, because it will open up to the opportunity that there's something good to be had, by learning, by suffering, by experiencing and remaining open. But by trying to get justice, by expecting justice, I just don't see anything but suffering coming out of that.
Yeah, the Catholic definition is justice is considered a virtue. It's something that we humans strive for. Okay,
Mhm.
this is like the human side, the finite side of justice. It's a virtue like patience and goodness and so on and so forth. So it's just where we have the constant habit, because all of the virtues are good habits and vices are bad habits. So it's the good habit of rendering what is due to each and every one. So, what's due to God is worship, and so we worship God. And the question from the live chat now is, what are your prayers like? What is your prayer life like? Do you raise your thoughts to God frequently? Is it wordless, or is it with words and music, or is it petition, thanksgiving, gratitude? What's the most common way that you raise your thoughts to God?
Mostly, an offering and a gratitude, a self-recognition. So again, back to that, the posture is the right state of mind. I try to get to a place with myself where I am actually feeling the words of my prayer. And John O'Donohue, a Catholic priest, I believe, um, suggested in one of his lectures, to write the prayer of your life
Uh,
and have that be something that is uniquely yours,
okay.
and have it be something that you write over a long time so that it lives with you. And I have been working on that, and
Wow.
I can give some example of, I've had many, variations of the form since I've taken on that homework. Um, as of late, certain words that I have spoken are, "May I have perfect faith, and may you do great works through me." And there's more to it, but, I'm at the risk of sharing something that is ultimately supposed to remain intimate. I share those words and saying that I could say them without any real connection to them. But prayer will exist for me when I feel them, when I truly feel that I mean them with my whole heart. And those words allow for me a sense of humility of mind, and a sense of devotion and service to my heart and my whole being in relationship to, my soul, which fills my whole body. And so when I feel my soul alive and my whole body shivers up the spine, when I feel the words, no matter how many times I repeat them, just becoming more rich and drenched in meaning, I feel that I am actually praying.
Yeah. In the Catholic Church, we have the sacrament of confession, among other sacraments, and I love it. I try to go every week or two. And, one of the penances I get from my parish priest here is, he'll just tell me, say, one Our Father, but with your whole heart. And I'm
Mhm.
like, well, I can say the Our Father. I'm not sure. I'm not sure I could say it with my whole heart. You know what I mean? Like, that's
Yeah,
hard. That's hard.
yeah,
That's a big penance.
unless you say it 100 times, and there's something really humbling to the mind about repetition. It's like, "Why are you making me do this? I don't think I should do this. I think that this is stupid." And
Unnatural, yeah.
And then eventually, when you get to the point where you can feel the words in spite of the mind's protests, I think then you're actually getting to what he's talking about.
Yeah, it's hard. They say, the saints, they say that, if you were to say, for example, one Hail Mary with true love and simplicity and authenticity, it's like that's it. You're a saint, at that point. It's going to transform you, right? But how many hundreds have I prayed and I'm not transformed, not completely, not yet. So it's humbling.
I'm wary of any story that makes a suggestion that we don't need to be transformed over and over again.
Yeah, yeah, of course, it's ongoing conversion. But
Just like
it's just
Christ,
a it's just to
the
drill in the point. It's just to drill in the point. The prayer of the heart, and that authenticity and that love, that unfettered love. That
yeah.
is the goal. That's the ideal, and we're not
Yeah.
there. Most of us are not there, so it's a work in progress. And so, yes, it's an ongoing thing, and it's a daily struggle. And
But as you said, Christ fought with the animal. He fought with his humanness
yeah,
even the night before
yeah,
the crucifixion. Um, that is an example to all of us that even amongst the greatest of us, we will be in relationship with our weakest impulses. That will always be there, and that is not something to try to shirk off or cut away as many of the ego destructive modalities would have you think. The ego needs to be embraced by something greater than itself. It does not need to be destroyed. It needs to be transcended but kept as a part of the whole. It's not going to be put down into hell with the
hmm
rest of your body and the rest of earth. It needs to all be held within it because it's just waiting to happen. It's literally just waiting for us to remember.
I have two questions for you. These are trick questions. Okay. Number
Okay.
one, who do you love the most in terms of human beings, not God? Do you love yourself the most, your wife, your dog? Who do you love the most? It's got to be a human, okay? Pick a human.
It's a cruel question. It's varying forms of love. The most painful love I feel for my son.
Okay.
And I would say that that might argue that it is the most intense love or the greatest love, although the love I feel for my wife is pretty absolute.
Okay, next question. Who hypothetically, theoretically, like you don't need to name names, but who do you love the least? And you might say, well, I love the least someone I've never met that's over, some criminal or some pervert, or maybe I hate Hitler the least. It's not easy to answer, but paint a little picture of who it might be that you love the least, please.
I have no idea how to answer that
It's
question.
hard. It's hard. It's hard. Do you have any enemies?
No.
Okay. But,
What I mean, that would be something that would require me keeping that alive.
do you love your son more than you love me?
Are we trying to connect to
I
Buddhist?
want you to say that there's a difference. I want you to admit that you love your son more than you love me, which is okay. Okay? I want you to admit that and then say, so there is a spectrum. We don't know where the person you love the least is. We don't know who
Mm,
that is. But there's someone.
sure.
Hopefully it's not me, but there's someone you love the least. Okay? And so my point here is not to name names. My point here is that there was a quote by a controversial saint in the Catholic Church, Doris Day, who's considered some sort of lefty communist or whatever. But she said that if you want to know how much you love God, just think of the person that you love least, and that's how much you love God. Not the person you love most. That's not how much you love God. You love God to the extent that you love that person that you love the least. So
Mm.
it's an interesting thought experiment.
A thought experiment, sure, to put the mind in relationship to remember that you are still judging. Mhm. So, I'm not sure I'm gonna be able to answer that question with any kind of satisfactory answer. However, I will say that, yeah, easily I love my son more than you because I devote my life, you know? And I have no qualms with, a human being having preferences.
Yeah.
However, I see the value in what she's expressing as Christ was trying to point out the how you treat the least of these
Yes.
is how you
Yes.
treat me.
Yes.
I've been actually trying I would say it's my dog that I love the least, and that she has literally been my Christ teacher in many ways, because I she's smelly and she's dumb and she's always in the way, and she wasn't my choice entirely. I said yes, but I regretted it. And it's not that I hate dogs, it's just that this one in particular was a challenge, just a big old challenge. And she has been such a wonderful challenge for me because she's making me the river stone in many ways that I can when I stop and give her attention, I actually feel closer to Christ, genuinely. I feel it more in my heart that
Yeah.
I'm actually getting the point, that I need to love this dog with more genuine intimacy, and then I can maybe understand Christ a little better.
Well, they're going to legalize bestiality very soon, so you'll be able to love your dog very well. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That was inappropriate. I'm sorry. I've got two final questions before we wrap up. What do you think of Francis of Assisi, the saint, with his animals and his love for creation? And what do you think of Pope Francis?
You know, I don't know either character enough to be able to
No?
remark. I do know that Richard Rohr particularly spoke of with great admiration Francis of Assisi. So Rohr is actually my closest contact
Yeah, he's a
to
Franciscan. Yeah.
Franciscan
Yeah.
philosophy. So in that vein, I have greatly appreciated much of what I've learned from Rohr because he's given me a perspective of Christianity that I can actually hold Christ closer to my heart with. So in many ways, even even if Richard Rohr is a rebel or a outcast or a you know
Heretic.
a heretic, yeah, heretic, I think Christ was the ultimate heretic. He was the
Ah.
one talking about bringing the church down in 3 days. I mean, Christ is the ultimate rock star when it comes to that. He challenged everything down to the letter. Who is he to speak with such authority? He said, and the institution and the state crucified him. I don't get down much with institutions talking about heretics and heresy and all that, and in so much as I'm really interested in knowing what shakes the order of things, because God is constantly shaking the order of things because it is our proclivity to go towards capturing the truth when the truth is a living, breathing thing that needs to be felt rather than owned intellectually. So
Yeah, yeah,
I appreciate the dialogue that brings back life into things.
yeah. It's interesting you mentioned that because, Pope Francis is controversial because he's shaking things up and the rigid right is angry. They want just the good old days and, tradition. And there's nothing wrong with tradition, but they've sort of missed the boat on the living aspect of Christ and his church. And St. Paul said in Ephesians, Christ and his church are one. So, and St. Augustine famously said that, the church will totter when Christ totters, but how can Christ totters? So it's like if you understand that Christ and his church are one, then yeah, you're not afraid. You're not afraid. And I was going to say Saint Pope Francis, but he's not canonized yet. But Pope Francis is not afraid. He's imperfect. He may be wrong about many things, but I think he's a saintly Christian, and I think that he has that good type of rebellion in him, that Christ-like rebellion in him, and the rigid right doesn't like it, you know, which is
Mhm,
very telling. But
mhm,
the left are also getting too excited, thinking that it means worldliness and license for sin. But
mm,
in the middle, if you're just a practicing Catholic without any prefixes, then I think you're able to appreciate his childlike innocence, his playfulness, and like you said, that astonishing freedom that we can have in Christ.
mhm,
So it's been very nice meeting you. Thank you
mhm.
for the lovely music. That was also an extra bonus. And I hope you come back again in the future. And uh, if you do find yourself praying, you can ask God to smile on me too. Okay.
All right.
So
Well,
give my love to your family, and thanks again for taking the time.
will do. Yes. Lovely to discourse with you.
Excellent to meet you, and hopefully we'll do this again in the new year. My calendar's jam-packed because of Podmatch. It's working so well that my calendar's full even into late January, early February. So, but in the new year, we'll have you back, and maybe you can play us another tune.
All right. Would love to.
Excellent to meet you. Thank you so much, my brother.
Same.
God bless you. Bye-bye.